Welcome to the Gentle Transplanting webinar presented by the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary, the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul. You can email us questions since the chat pod will not be active, but we do welcome questions by email, so we can get started. So hello, I'm Kate Henderson, seed saver and gardener for the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary. The Heirloom Seed Sanctuary is a ministry of the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul. It is sanctuary for a collection of locally adapted seeds brought here in the late 90s by local organic farmers Carol and Robert Moak. The seed collection includes vegetable, flower, and herb varieties that they grew for their market garden: onions, cucumbers, tomatoes, lettuce, beets and carrots, spinach, peas, beans, and almost any other commonly available variety. The Heirloom Seed Sanctuary defines the word heirloom to mean a variety that either has been or is worthy of being passed down through generations. Just as furniture and other items are lovingly made to this day for the purpose of being passed down in families, heirloom varieties also develop and change. Heirloom varieties are always open-pollinated, which means, according to the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security, open-pollinated, or OP, means OPs produce seed that closely resemble the parent. OP varieties are a result of combining parents that are genetically similar. If you plant an OP, save seed, and grow that seed the next season, the plants will look like the ones you grew last year. One of my many seed-saving teachers has been John Navazio, organic plant breeder and author of the book, The Organic Seed Grower. He begins his book by explaining the significance of seed saving. Seed is the vital link to our agricultural past, he says. All of the changes that have occurred in the domestication of our crops are a reflection of the ingenuity and perseverance of our agricultural ancestors. This is even more wondrous when we realize that all of the plants we rely on for our very existence are derived from wild plants that were not usually succulent. In fact, they were often bitter or sour, far beyond what our modern palates would tolerate. The modern crops that grace our tables daily are all derived from a much larger number of plants that were found to be edible and were used extensively by our hunter-gatherer forebears. While natural selection had already shaped these wild plants, the selection pressure of the people who first grew them under cultivation further changed them to better suit their needs." End quote. So you can see seed saving is part of the thousands of years of tradition of human relationships. These webinars are for beginner seed savers, those who are just starting to develop their relationship with a particular favorite vegetable, flower, and herb plant variety. Seed saving can be complicated, but for some plants it is quite simple. So we will focus here on those simpler types so that you can experience success and lay a foundation on which to build your seed saving practices. I believe that we are all born seed savers, since in essence, seed saving is just sorting desirable plants from undesirable plants, good-tasting fruits from bad-tasting fruits, whole healthy seeds from less desirable seeds, etc. Just watch a child with a box of colored candy and you'll see how we do this naturally. In live workshops, I do this exercise with adults and the same pattern arises. See the chipped, damaged blue Smartie? That one got popped into a mouth right away. It was no good for saving. We want to help you develop the precious relationship of midwife to your plants. And to this end, this series will come full circle, from starting with stored seed all the way around to sorting and storing your harvested seed. These webinars are based on a workshop series that was originally hosted by Carol and Robert Moak until 2008, and then by myself. It is a series of 5 webinars, each of which is timed according to what a seed saver in Kingston, Ontario, Canada can expect to be doing in their seed garden. They therefore occur every other month throughout the growing season, and we recommend that you view them in that order and at the appropriate time of year. That is Robert Moak on the left, with 2 Sisters of Providence enjoying his delicious tomatoes. These are not gardening workshops. Gardening is involved, of course, but there are many great gardening resources out there, so we will leave you to find them while we focus on seed saving. I have heard that 9 out of 10 bites of our food, whatever doesn't come from the sea, relies on seed, since even livestock eat seeds and plants. and I believe it. I myself was a professional gardener for many years before I thought to save seeds of my own, but now I find it a very enriching, meaningful activity, and I hope to facilitate that same reverence in you. Plant varieties that for thousands of years have been cultivated by human beings are living beings in direct reciprocal relationship with humans, providing us with nourishment and beauty while we provide them with a safe nursery for their seeds and a healthy growing situation for them as plants. This comes to the heart of the kindness of the mystery of creation. To paraphrase Father Thomas Berry, the universe is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. I wish you awe and wonder on this journey to saving your own seeds. So as I mentioned, this is part 2 of our series, and this is the webinar on transplanting. So these webinars are timed according to what we are doing in our seed gardens here at the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary. So at this time we are transplanting our crops, and we're doing that both in the greenhouse and outside into the earth. So we will cover both topics here, as well as some planting for seed into the garden. Since we have decided to save seed from our favorite food crops for various reasons, we need to be extra thoughtful about how we treat that crop. Each of us will make different decisions based on what that means to us and based on what we observe of that crop's behavior over time. But the point is to be thoughtful. This workshop is called Gentle Transplanting because transplanting is often quite difficult for plants who generally don't move around very much. So we can make the process a bit easier so that our chances of survival and success in saving seeds is maximized. And this is our list of topics for this webinar. As we covered with planting, you will want to gather your materials ahead of time. If you are potting up indoors, you will likely want to add some compost to your soilless mix, since the plants will now need some nutrients from the soil. Use a very well-rotted manure or purchase weed-free compost locally. As with planting, set out your water a few hours ahead of time, both to let any chlorine evaporate out and to get the water to room temperature so as not to shock the plants. And use rainwater if possible. At this time of year we can use warm rainwater. Again, if you are potting up indoors, you will need larger pots. And if you're transplanting outside, you will likely have prepared space for your transplants by cultivating the soil or pulling back the mulch. Either way, you will need to have a spot for your plants to go that is reasonably comfortable for them. There's one more thing you will need to have ready, which is not on this slide, which is a label that has the name of your chosen seed crop. And we'll have more on that in a bit. Evaluation of seedlings. Here is where transplanting your seed crop differs from transplanting a food crop. Again, there are lots of resources available on gardening activities such as transplanting, so feel free to look those up for more details. Here we focus on seed saving, and transplanting is a great chance to evaluate your seedlings as a seed crop. Let's use tomatoes as an example. You have planted a few tomato seeds in a pot or flat, knowing that tomatoes need to be started indoors in order to bear fruit in our short growing season. Take the measure of the seeds that germinated by carefully observing all the plants in that flat. You want to get an overview of how the majority of those plants are looking. You will find that most look about the same height, same leaf shape and color, same stems. But you may find some that do not look like the others, like this poor little guy leaning out there. You may find one plant to be much bigger or much smaller. This little guy in the foreground is only half as tall as the majority of the plants in the flat. If you participated in the first webinar of this series, you may be able to call up your sheet of definitions that you started to fill out. Here it is again. Last time we learned about self and cross-pollinators, botanical name, inbreeding depression, and hybrid or F1. We covered the term heirloom and open-pollinated or OP in our introduction just now. At this point, I'd like to define the word roguing. Roguing is the first definition, and here it comes to us from organic plant breeder John Navazio, whose book will be listed in our resource section at the end of this webinar. And the second quote is from the Bauta Family Initiative for Canadian Seed Security from their training PowerPoint. So the definition as a transitive verb is the act of identifying and removing rogue plants from seed fields at any stage of a seed crop's growth or development. So basically what that means is you rogue when you remove a plant that is not behaving as it should. The Bauta folks define it as walking through your crop and pulling plants that you don't want to reproduce, which will eliminate or minimize their contribution of genes to the next generation of seed, accidental crossing. Rogue more than once during the season, and rogue before flowering to remove unwanted pollen. So this is a great time to rogue your seed crop for the first time by evaluating the whole population, i.e. all the plants you have that germinated, identifying what is quote-unquote normal and healthy and what is not. As a food crop, you might want to just plant them all and hope for the best. As a breeding project, you might select the unusual ones if they have a particular characteristic you like. But for seed-saving heirloom varieties, you will want to rogue out the nonconformist plants at this time. So we're going to take out that little guy and the leaner and keep the average ones. Transplanting is therefore a good idea for many crops. Carol Deppy, who's a plant breeder in Oregon, agrees. Transplants can take much of the gamble out of spring. More erratic, risky spring weather increases the risks associated with direct seeding and increases the relative advantage of transplants. John Navazio agrees. And he says that lettuce requires a long growing season to mature a seed crop. So producing the crop from transplants has several advantages. And he goes on to say, first, the crop can be given 3 to 4 weeks of time to develop in the greenhouse or cold frame, when field temperatures are still too cool for active growth of the young plant. When the transplants are well past the seedling stage and are able to put on rapid growth, they are put into the field. Second, young lettuce plants with a minimum of 4 to 6 true leaves have several characteristics that are very representative of the mature plant, and this gives you an opportunity to make an initial selection to type. The color and any colored spotting that may exist in the variety is usually clearly evident in the seedling tray at this point. Any off-types for these traits that may exist in a particular seed lot for a specific variety can be identified in the greenhouse and discarded before the variety is transplanted. The third advantage of transplanting the crop is cultural, as you can avoid the blocking and thinning as well as early weeding of the direct seeded crop when the lettuce seedlings are young and have to compete with the first flush of weeds. So as a reminder, we are recommending that you begin your seed saving practice with these simpler types shown here. They are the beans, peas, lettuce, and tomatoes. And here they're listed with their botanical names so that you can remember those as well. So, can I transplant all those simpler types given the advantages? The answer is no. Peas and beans must be direct seeded. Seed must be planted directly in the ground. So your gardening resources will tell you which crops cannot stand to be moved in this way. Tomatoes must be started ahead, of course, and lettuce, which we are often told should be direct seeded as a food crop, is best transplanted for seed. And John Navazio discusses this again in a section entitled Genetic Maintenance in his book. In this photo of a direct-seeded lettuce crop, there are obviously some plants that differ in leaf color and shape and head formation. Again, we can see when we evaluate that the majority of the crop have ruffled red leaves and a loose head formation. This means that the others that don't conform to that must be removed, preferably before they flower. You should see less variation in your self-pollinating crops, these simpler crops, your lettuce, peas, beans, and tomatoes. One reason we recommend you start with them and not squash, for example, is the amount of variation in the cross-pollinating crops. These were supposed to be small sugar pie pumpkins, but clearly a neighbor was growing zucchinis when this seed was formed. This seed was purchased from a very reputable seed organization. It was supposed to be Brussels sprouts, but Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, cabbages, and even broccoli and cauliflower are all the same botanically. They're all Brassica oleracea. Turnip and rutabaga are different species, but clearly here they cross somehow anyway. At some point in your seed-saving career, you may find these accidents quite exciting, but for now, let's stick with the basics of the self-pollinators. So can I put seeds in the earth and still get a seed crop? Yes. In fact, you will have to do that with the peas and beans. Here is a lovely crop of royal burgundy bush beans, nicely spaced away from other beans of its species, with a lettuce to the right and flowers to the left. Today, early spring, it is a little early to plant bean seeds in the ground here in Kingston, but your gardening resources will tell you what you need to know about that. So, how to transplant? Here are the materials you gathered, plus one more. Your heirloom vegetable has a name that has been handed down with it over generations. The name may be associated with a story, a place, a particular person, etc. In order to not lose that name over the course of the growing season, please take time to make a permanent label of some kind that will not fade in the sun and rain or break down in the soil. Here we are at a recent live workshop using old-fashioned milk paint on wooden stakes, which can stay in the garden all season long and likely for many more seasons. There are many other ways of making permanent garden labels, which also work well. And of course, you'll draw a little map of your garden to show which plants went where. Your transplanting method should involve peace of mind. So set your phone aside, turn off the ringer, and make space for peaceful, uninterrupted, quality time with your plants as you transplant them. Remember, you're developing a relationship with them that will nourish you both over years. So do take time to be undistracted as you transplant. Transplanting indoors, you will tell your plants that you are about to move them. Ask their permission if you like. I tend to withhold water before transplanting. A wise couple told me years ago that this triggered the plants to brace themselves for big change. So there's our flat of seedlings close together. Next, you'll mix some compost with your potting mix and fill it into a flatter pot. Again, there are lots of recommendations for this in gardening resources. And then you'll make evenly spaced holes to be ready for your plants to go into. The reason for even equal spacing is that there's then equal opportunity for each plant. Then you'll gently dig out and tease apart the roots. Remember, roots are very important to the plant. Try not to break them, but gently tease them while holding the plant up near the leaves. Don't squish the stems either. Just be patient and work with the plants with care. You will need to quickly evaluate the roots of each plant at this stage. This is when you get to have a look at the roots. And then you'll ease those roots down into the prepared hole so that they go all the way down. And don't leave any roots outside the hole exposed to the air if possible. Tuck the soil up around the stem and gently tamp it down. And water your plants and label them. You can see the popsicle stick in this flat. That works very well indoors. Transplanting into the garden is very similar, but you will likely need larger holes dug with a trowel. Again, evaluate your plants and compost any that do not conform to the average that are in your flat. Remember to tease them out of the flat gently and quickly evaluate the roots before tucking them into the ground. Plants with stunted or abnormal roots will not likely succeed, so you're just as well to compost them. tuck them into a hole that is big enough to accommodate all roots. Here we are doing some transplanting, and you can notice the tall stake on the right-hand side. That's the name stake, already pounded in to label those plants that are going in. And you'll also notice we're using a string line to keep the plants straight, to keep them in right relationship with each other. So lettuces and tomatoes should have enough space for full maturity. And you can find that out again from your gardening resources. They should be far enough apart so that you can get a good look at each plant in order to rogue again later on. You will have to watch your plants through the growing season. But they should be close enough that when they flower, they can only touch each other. And that way, if any cross-pollinating does occur, it will only be with their own type. Here's a little garden planning reminder from the last webinar. And this graphic, again, is from the Bauta Family Initiative. And this is about where to transplant if you're putting your plants in, and adjusting your garden plan for seed saving. So the types that we recommend you start with, the peas, lettuce, tomato, and the regular beans, the bush beans, are in that group as well. Should be only 5 to 20 feet apart. And at this stage, you can probably consider growing just one variety of each for seed saving. So you can plant more than one variety of lettuce, but just eat the other varieties. Don't let them bolt or go to seed. And aim for at least 5 to 10 plants for your population, and give them a little extra space, a few inches more around all of them than you would give them as a food crop. But again, not so far apart that they won't, that they can't maybe touch each other when they're flowering. So, as promised, here is a list of resources. These are the ones that I go to quite a lot because I'm still learning myself. And that brings us to the end of this second webinar in our series. So I'd like to thank the Bauta Family Initiative for Canadian Seed Security and the Sisters of Providence of St. Vincent de Paul for hosting this. You can find this, the other webinars listed if you want to go back or review anything. They'll all be at www.providence.ca/seeds. Look for the Heirloom Seed Sanctuary. And our next webinar, just so you know, will be July 8th. And I hope you'll join us then. Thanks very much.